Hello and welcome to the Southbound Sports Show. I'm your host, Richie Leahy, here with my co-host, Matty B. He's on the road calling in today. At a coaches meeting, Matt, you want to give any insights on that before we get into the NFL stuff?
Yeah, one of the things that I didn't even really know as a player was going on in this area is the different coaches associations. And tonight we had one of our coaches meetings and kind of helped with the selection of some of the all-star games and academic banquets, just different rewards for the kids. So we met. It's nice to be able to talk ball with coaches from other schools and kind of get some ideas on different things scheme-wise and player-wise and how you deal with different things, because obviously no two teams have the same makeup of student bodies and how you handle different situations. So kind of gives you peace of mind just being able to talk with other coaches and pick their brains. Definitely a very humbling experience for me as a younger coach, because within our association, there's a lot of coaches who've been very successful. And so it's nice to be able to listen to how they're running things with their programs. And we meet once a month, and it's really nice to be able to go in and pick the brains of some of the local legends to see how they're doing things.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So in regards to secrets, do you talk about what strategies, and have you ever tried to trick other coaches by talking about things you're not going to do?
I have not. I'm not good enough yet to be able to pull the one over. But just for me personally, it's in terms of if you have a player or if you have a situation where you're looking to hide someone, where do you hide them? Because when you're dealing with a lower level program like we have, you may not have a high caliber athlete at every position. So you got to look at, okay, if I have out of 11 starting players, if I have 7 that are really good and I need to hide some guys, where is the best places? Where do I need to have my strength so that I can hide as many weaknesses as I can? Because, from year to year, that's going to change. But if you can understand where you need to be the strongest, I think it makes hiding your weaknesses a lot easier.
And for people that don't really watch high school football, you can think about it in terms of like college or even the NFL. Some of the teams have to change schemes from year to year, and like just going from one quarterback to the next, and especially in college with recruiting, because you always hear about it, how coaches have certain holes and it's on them. But in high school, it's not really on the coach because they're not able to bring in players that they know they need. So they kind of just have to adapt and scheme instead.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges of high school sports is the fact that you have to look at some of this like, I understand in 6th grade and in 7th grade, these are the kids that I have coming up. If I don't have a running threat quarterback coming up in the program.
All right, we might have lost Matt there. Like I said, he's calling in.
To that style of quarterback, because I have to know who's coming in.
Yeah, that's true. So is there anything else you want to hit on? We lost you there for a sec. All right, we're going to jump right into the Steelers. So I'll say right now that off the top here, we've had some people message and stuff and try to reach out and ask what the Steelers are doing. They really don't have any options. So they're out of money. We talked about it last week, how the coronavirus, the salary cap, the NFL looks at it and they look at the ticket revenue and they're able to make adjustments. They officially set the cap this week, or I guess the middle of last week, at $182.5 million. Last year, it was $198.2 million. So you're dropping $16 million right off of what teams are able to do. And so like with Ben, and even with his restructured deal, he's taken the extra bump that the salary cap would have had, and he's spending it all himself. So you're basically just subtracting another Ben Roethlisberger from the team, and it's out of the team's control. So it's not like the NFL teams had planned, oh, you know what, we should have our guys, a certain number of them, end their contracts just because in case the pandemic hits. Like, no, it's out of their control. That's why I didn't want to sound negative on the podcast for the outlook of the Steelers next year, but when Ben announced he was coming back, it was almost like a death sentence to this season, I feel like. They're not going to be able to fill their holes. They're not going to be able to sign any big splash free agent unless they're able to make deals like we had talked about, maybe letting like Dupree go, which they did. He signed with the Titans, and maybe bringing in like a J.J. Watt, but then you're going to be letting every other guy go in that scenario. And even without signing those guys, they're already having to just watch their free agents just sign with other teams on the first day. And I know it could be tough, but now you're hoping that you brought back Ben. Is he going to be enough to get them into the playoffs and maybe stop the team from a complete rebuild? What do you think, Matt?
Yes. I think at bare minimum, having Roethlisberger back puts them in the playoffs. You saw it from last year that he just him alone is enough to get them by. The bigger question is, when has Pittsburgh ever been really aggressive in free agency? The answer is never. They've never been aggressive in free agency. Every year, you see these high-profile guys sign the big contracts, and it's not a formula for success. You don't look at the Washington football team. They're the prime example of why you don't spend high in free agency, because every year, for as long as I can remember, they've bought one of the highest priced, big name, big tag free agents, and they've never done anything. They're barely a playoff qualifying team. I mean, I know this past year, because of Riverboat Ron, they won the division. That's the first division title in forever. Pittsburgh's strategy has always been build through the draft, take these undrafted free agencies, build them within the program, and they're fine. The world wasn't collapsing when Emmanuel Sanders and Mike Wallace left. It didn't collapse when Antonio Brown left. It's not going to collapse when Juju leaves. Their Claypool will fill the role. They'll have the other guys in the wing. They'll draft some guy in the 7th round, and he'll play great. I'd like to see them address tight end somewhere in free agency because of losing one of their tight ends. I think that's important because of how Ben throws the ball, and with his ability to check plays, I think that's an important part of their offense. But I don't think the sky's falling. I don't think, when you look at the guys that were injured over the course, you're just getting, yes, losing Bud Dupree might hurt, but does it hurt as much as getting a healthy Devin Bush? I'd rather have a healthy Devin Bush than Bud Dupree, who was kind of borderline average at best. He had a great year this past year to cash in free agency. But we were on this podcast ourselves saying he really hasn't done much to this point to warrant a big tag contract.
Well, it seemed like he only played well whenever his contract was up. And we talked last week about the franchise tag, and there were some rumors that they might offer it to him. But with the drop in salary cap, it just wasn't going to happen. And only 10 teams ended up using the salary cap or the franchise tag this year. And I think it's a big reason because of the salary cap. The Giants did Leonard Williams, Washington, Brandon Scherff, Bears, Allen Robinson, the Bucks, Chris Godwin. I think we talked about some of these last week. The Jags got Cam Robinson, Panthers, Taylor Moton, Broncos, Justin Simmons, Jets, Marcus May, and then the Saints, Marcus Williams. So a lot of teams, like the Bucs, just hold on to Godwin because they restructured Tom Brady's deal. They're bringing him back for 2 more years. I think he'll be 48, 47? And just a random thing that I thought of, because I don't think a lot of people really think of once you're playing in your 40s, in football, it's kind of crazy. But my comparison right now to how Tom Brady's doing it is Julio Franco, Matt. Do you remember him?
Absolutely.
Different sport, baseball, but he played for Atlanta when he was 45, which I think is what Tom Brady is. Was he this year? Or no, he's going to be. He's 43 right now.
No, I was going to say his contract. He said he wanted to play until he's 45.
Well, I think he can because I think that's where Julio Franco had his drop off. And Matt, it's not even a bad drop off. So when he's 45, he hit 309. There are some major league players that don't even sniff anywhere near 300 their entire career. The dude had a 300 season at 45. And I'm not saying like he was filling in. He had 361, 320 at bats. So 320 at bats, because I think they subtract like walks or whatever. So he had 361 plate appearances, is what I believe the first number I was going to read. So he's hitting 300 at age 45 for Atlanta. And then I look at Tom Brady. Okay, he could probably play till he's 45. If that's the baseline, because if you think Julio Franco, he's playing third base and DH. I don't even know if that's right. Or no, there's first base. He's playing first base, and I read it backwards.
Wasn't he using performance-enhancing drugs, though?
Who, Franco?
Yeah.
I don't know. Was he?
I thought he was on Viagra. Wasn't he the poster advertisement guy for Viagra?
Wasn't that Rafael Palmeiro?
Oh, that's right. That's right.
People are probably like, what are they talking about? But which reminds me, because sticking on baseball for no reason, I saw an ad. It was like, hey, without funding, these players wouldn't have played their sports. And it was like Big Papi wouldn't have hit home runs. And I was thinking, they said if he didn't have a bat. I was like, no, he wouldn't have hit them if he didn't take steroids like he was caught doing. But for some reason, everyone forgets about Big Papi doing it. And they're just like, oh, Barry Bonds. Never been caught, but hey, let's shame him. A-Rod? I mean, you even text me about A-Rod. It's like, A-Rod? How am I supposed to keep up with what he's doing these days? So my man Barry Bonds, got to put him in the Hall of Fame. Definitely should be in. And Pete Rose, too. I mean, we're talking about gambling. NCAA tournament, it's becoming legal in every state. How are they in baseball not welcoming him in? Because it's such a farce where they're like, hey, play fantasy baseball, bet on our games, and try to help promote the sport. And then they're like, but Pete Rose, definitely not even in. Like, what an embarrassment. Like, he wasn't giving us a cut. If he was giving them a cut, they probably would have been all for it. So, but that's my thing. For the Patriots and like the Buccaneers, they're trying to sign people for 2 more years, it looks like. They just won the Super Bowl. I thought they would have had maybe 1 more year. I mean, I had a good feeling Tom Brady was going to come ready to play. I didn't think he was going to win it in his first year. I thought he was going to do like a Brett Favre, where his second year was going to be his familiar year with the team, and they had already had mostly everyone locked up. But he won it the first year. Now he's going to try for 2 more years. Crazy. If Julio Franco can do it, though, hitting 300, like some of the All-Stars that are picked, they don't even hit 300. And he's hitting it at 45, so Tom Brady can do it. He's at a position where you're just standing around throwing the ball. He never rolls out, really. So as long as he's getting rid of the ball and throwing it away and not taking sacks, I think he can do it. Let's see what else. Those are all the franchise tags. On the other side, the Patriots signing Hunter Henry. And Cam Newton has come out and said things are already different based on their team. I think they're bringing Cam back. So what do you think for them coming into next year?
Oh, I think I'm curious to see how New England does, because you look at what they're doing in free agency. This is the most aggressive I've seen Bill Belichick in probably a decade in free agency.
You know why?
The last time I can remember him being this aggressive, absolutely, because he let Brady go, and Brady won a Super Bowl without him. But I can remember watching in the AFC Championship game, Tom Brady throwing a pass to Jabbar Gaffney, hitting him right between the 8 and the 8 on his jersey, and thinking, wow, he has literally nobody to throw to. He has nobody. And then that offseason, they brought in Corey Dillon, and they brought in like 1,000 legitimate receivers and running backs and everything else, and they won a Super Bowl. So it's like I almost feel like Belichick forgets that he has to actually bring in some talent from time to time too to go along with his athletes. It's like, well, I guess I'll just let everyone else go, and then all of a sudden, just boom. He was buying all kinds of receivers and tight ends and everything else. Cam Newton has no reason to lose next year.
So you're saying Buccaneers, Patriots in the Super Bowl?
Well, I wouldn't go that far. I mean, there's still my man John Gruden's going to make some moves yet.
John Gruden, of all the teams you could throw out there, it's going to be bad for them.
No, I'm gonna ride hard. I'm gonna continue to double down, and I'm gonna will this into existence.
People
because of this podcast.
People listen to the show and they're gonna message you.
I do know.
That's the one thing that you get every year. It's like they know you online as the Raiders guy. Actually, pretty much just the Gruden guy.
I was there when Tampa won the Super Bowl.
Well, that was going to be my reason why Belichick had to make all those signings. Tom Brady must have sent him a copy of our show where I call him out for having a losing record without him.
And I'm sure that factors in. But I also think that the one thing that you can look, if you're a black and white analytics guy, you can look at it like that's the case. But I think dynamically within a team, when you have a quarterback injury, and I could say this from experience, when you go from having your starting quarterback go down, it totally disrupts the locker room, the confidence of the players, the whole shebang. And they play differently when they know they got Rudolph pulling the sled, as opposed to when Rudolph goes down with an injury.
That's true. And I mean, speaking of like the quarterbacks you're talking about, I think, because I wanted to circle back around, I don't want to say that the Steelers are the only team that's affected by the salary cap drop, but a lot of the teams that are having trouble all have their quarterbacks as their highest paid guy sucking up a lot of their salary cap. Matt Ryan with the Falcons, Aaron Rodgers with the Packers, Russell Wilson with the Seahawks, which is why I think you saw a lot of trade rumors with him, Kirk Cousins with the Vikings, and Tannehill with Tennessee, and then I guess you have some other ones like Aaron Donald, going back to Jared Goff, which I'm not even sure if that's going to hit the Rams because of the trade or if that's going to hit the Lions already. And then Garoppolo, another guy that you've heard about moving around. And then, of course, Roethlisberger. So you have Roethlisberger, who's in that list. I don't know how many guys they had on that list of 10 or so, but those guys are all right there. Plus, I've said it before, like you talked about the Steelers not signing anyone. They signed Joe Hayden. Now he's eating a big chunk of the salary cap this year. And if you're looking at it, do the performance on the field warrant that? I don't know. I mean, the defense, the secondary has always kind of seemed spotty to me. But at some point you have to make that decision like, hey, we're going to bring in some secondary guys. And it's going to hit the salary cap just because of how other teams are signing them. So I think that's how, even with some of the other moves that have happened today, I think a lot of them are defenders. Going back to quarterbacks, though, the Miami, they let Ryan Fitzpatrick go, and he's going to Washington. So like you had said, what are they doing? Washington signs all these big guys. They're bringing in Fitzmagic, Matt.
I love it.
I had said they were probably interested in Roethlisberger. I would think of guys that just sometimes are lights out and sometimes throw a bunch of picks. Ryan Fitzpatrick's probably 1A or 1B to Ben Roethlisberger's 1A, don't you think?
Well, Fitzpatrick was in such a weird situation because it was like he played well, and then for the Dolphins, and he was under the assumption that he was the guy, and they were like, Matt, we're going to go to it. We're just ruling you out till we know that he knows what's going on.
Well, they even said he didn't even know what's going on. They said they wanted to know how he could do because they were already looking for next year's draft. Like, they were almost ready to tank. They're like, Fitzpatrick, come on, we know we're not going to win in the playoffs. What are you doing? You're winning too much. Go sit down.
Yeah.
Go sit down. And then Tua was winning. So then they probably threw their hands up and were like, what's going on? We can't even tank good anymore. But
I agree. I think that hurt them. It's like you always ride the hot hand.
But they're going to go with Tua. They signed Jacoby Brissett to be his backup. So, I mean, Brissett was pretty good with the Colts. I don't know how I feel, though, because Andy Dalton looked like he was going to be a decent backup. And then when they needed him, it was almost like, oh, my gosh, what happened to you in 1 year? Now he's going to Chicago.
Did you say that Brissett was going to Washington as well, or where was he going?
No, he's going to Miami for to be Tua's backup to replace Fitzpatrick.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, Fitzpatrick going to Washington. He's going to be their guy. Heineke, or however you pronounce his name, that played in the playoffs. He's going to be. They're going to be battling for the quarterback spot. So Fitzpatrick's going to the same exact situation. People are going to want the quarterback that played well in the playoffs. So if Fitzpatrick comes out and throws like 3 picks, he's going to have so much pressure. It's almost like, what are you doing? And then Brissett is going to be going to Miami, like I said. I thought he had more suitors where he could go and try to find a better position because he wasn't bad with the Colts. But like I said, you never know because Andy Dalton fell off. And now he's going to Chicago. People are thinking that ends the Bears' chances at Russell Wilson. But still, if you're looking at that quarterback room and you see Trubisky and Andy Dalton, and then someone's like, hey, Russell Wilson's over here, you're not going to be like, no. We signed Andy Dalton. We're good now. So, like, I don't understand why people are like, oh, the Bears are set for next year. It's like, no. They're still probably thinking, man, we're one guy away from making a deep run. Your boy Jameis re-signed in New Orleans. What do you think of that?
I had mixed feelings. I think it depends on what they're going to do with him. I really do like. Because I've watched him and studied him enough that I think he's a good quality quarterback. I just think, what's Sean Payton going to do with him? Are they going to play this Taysom Hill, Jameis Winston? Are they going to do this like 2 quarterback rotational system? The Raiders did it with Jim Plunkett and Jay Schrader in the 80s, and it didn't work out well. You got to pick a guy and you got to ride him out.
I think they're going to pick Winston because Houston signed Tyrod Taylor. I'm wondering if they're going to try to ruin Watson's career because they don't have to let him go. They can let him do a Le'Veon Bell situation and just kind of like, hey, I don't come to practice. Like, we're going to keep paying you, but then no team's going to want to sign you next year. They're going to take a gamble on you outside of whatever. Like, they could just sit on him. And so then they're signing that. They signed Tyrod Taylor the same way that New Orleans signed Winston and New England has Cam Newton, where it's very heavy on incentives. So they have to do well. They have to go to the playoffs. They have to win. And I think that's why they roll with him. Taysom Hill's okay, but whenever the cards are down, and he has to play every week, we don't know if he can do that. I mean, we know that Winston can do that. He just has some issues with interceptions. I mean, throwing the ball and stuff, but he did have that eye surgery. We haven't really seen him since that. I don't know if that's a real thing or not. If that's going to make him better. How bad he couldn't see. So,
I mean, I think it would, but then you also look at he's not the only one that had interception issues. Brady had interception issues with Bruce Arians. Roethlisberger had issues with interceptions. I think some of that is also the way Arians calls a game.
And that's true. But I also wanted to bring up, before I don't forget, that by the time you're hearing this, there might be some big trades that have already happened. And so, like, Deshaun Watson might have a new team. Garoppolo might have a new team. I mean, who knows? Russell Wilson might be gone. He might be with the Bears, as I joke about it.
Or Raiders.
So that's going to happen probably starting Wednesday. So even though we're recording this Tuesday night, using as up-to-date information as we have as we go through some of these. But definitely check back. We'll be doing this again next week, going through some of the other moves, because with that salary cap, there are going to be moves. I mean, I guess the Bears didn't even sign Trubisky. So, like, are they just going with Andy Dalton? I don't even know that, because that seems like a worse deal. Like, right? I thought that they had signed him back.
Offer out there and see where he's going to be at. I mean, do you think?
Are they leaning with Nick Foles? Is that the way they're going? I don't even know if they still have him now, because I thought that they had re-signed him, but they must have re-signed Foles or still have him, right? Yeah, so it looks like, just to clarify, so if you're thinking, well, he's an idiot, obviously we're a Pittsburgh-based podcast, so I don't really follow the Bears that much. And so they traded for Nick Foles, so they looked like that they're giving him the option to go after it. They're giving Andy Dalton as his backup, so they're letting Trubisky completely go, which, of course, I haven't seen him sign anywhere else. I just assumed he was signed, but that makes sense. I called it a couple years ago. Awful pick. Who trades up for that guy? Who trades up for him? His quarterback stats in college weren't good. They were going on measurables, and then you have the marketing campaign from like the NFL and the Bears afterwards where they're like, oh yeah, great pick. I mean, we definitely traded up for him, but I think a lot of people were scratching their heads. And I said, it's not going to work out. I mean, he came close. He had his chances. I don't want to say that he didn't. I mean, he lasted longer than I thought he would, but still.
Glimmers of what he can be. It goes back to what we talked about back when he got drafted. If the Bears were willing to evolve and allow him to do some of the inside zone RPO concepts that he was running when he was at North Carolina, he had a chance to be successful. If they tried to put him as a boots on the ground pocket passer, he was going to absolutely fall on his face. And I think you see that with more of his scrambling and stuff. It seems like he kind of is in the middle of the road as far as his quarterbacking.
Well, I think the ACC puts out a ton of good quarterbacks. Like, there's no dispute on that. But I think when you're looking at it, the ACC is kind of weird where the teams at the top that can recruit well, there's a big gap. So you can't really look at a team's win-loss record. So, like, Trubisky at UNC getting 8 wins or whatever, like even last year, 8 wins was a great season for them. You can't look at that and be like, well, their quarterback's not going to be successful in the NFL, because some of the other teams, like Russell Wilson, he was lights out at NC State. They didn't have a big-time BCS-type season with him. Matt Ryan with Boston College. Like, you can see guys that clearly elevate their team, but, like, breaking it down, they still have big-time stats because a lot of the teams don't have, like, top defenses. Like, you can't look at Trubisky's stats against some of the big teams and they're like, oh, yeah, when he actually played a defense, didn't show up. And I think that's what I went through on the draft list. When you're playing good teams, you actually have to look good if you're going to go to the NFL, because guess what? In the NFL, you're playing good teams every week. Like, you can't just feast on teams that you're more talented than. And so I think the ACC and even like some of the Big Ten and other conferences like SEC and Big 12, like if they're teams that are coming from the middle and your quarterback's just feasting on like the less talented teams, it's not going to help. Like, the Big 12 has like defensive issues, but like if Patrick Mahomes, when he was in a shootout with Oklahoma, like the best team in their conference. He's not having a shootout where he's throwing for 600 yards against, like, I don't even know who's at the bottom of their years, like Baylor post-sanctions. Like, it's just not going to happen. Like, so you got to compete against the best teams. With Trubisky, I just didn't see it. So even the draft now, it's like, oh, some people should trade up and take some of the quarterbacks. It's like, well, go through the drafting, look at who they performed against, because you can light it up and throw for 300,000 yards like Haskins did, but then like what happens in the playoffs or like their bowl game, and then you look and you're like, oh, okay, so Ohio State guys they're not really delivering on the next level. Is it a scheme thing? Why isn't it considered that? I bring that up all the time. Sometimes it's just a system quarterback, even though some NFL scouts don't want to believe it. I'm not saying that's going to be Fields because they have a new coach now, It's a little bit more air raid. But some of the other teams and guys coming in, we'll see what happens. Are there any other big signings that stood out to you? I know I went through the quarterbacks.
I was just surprised with New England signing two of the top tight ends because it reminded me of when they were really dominant. A lot of teams were going to some of the more empty looks and going more wide receivers. And with having Gronk and Hernandez, it really put a lot of teams in a tough spot because they were emptying out with two tight ends, and it was putting teams are going to have to use all these different defensive backs in coverage. But it made a lot of conflicts as far as we're going to line up as two tight ends and run the ball at you, but also empty it out and throw it on you too. So I'm almost wondering if he's going back to reinventing some of the wheel that he had a couple of years ago to see if he can recreate that.
Yeah, so I don't know if we mentioned it. I know I mentioned Hunter Henry, but they also signed Johnny Smith to a 4-year deal. So they have them locked up for 3 and 4 years respectively. So looking at that, it's like they're definitely going to play to Cam Newton's strengths. Because last year they showed they're not afraid to run with him. And I think a lot of teams, like even the Panthers, at the end of the tenure there with Riverboat Ron, they were definitely afraid to have him run because they didn't want him banged up. And I think going into the 2 tight end looks definitely give him that extra protection. And guess what? Now he has some quick outlets. Where if you're going empty looks and your quarterback can run, he's going to take a lot more shots. Where I think whenever he's like almost go back to like Tim Tebow's offense at Florida. Guess what? The guy was on his best on the run, tight to the pocket. He wasn't doing like 7-step drops where he's just sitting back there throwing the ball. Like, yeah, we know he has the arm strength. But give him some outlets that can also stay in and block and keep the defense tight so you're not taking as many full-speed hits. You're not running 10 yards and having a linebacker get a full head of steam and blasting you in the chest. And so I think by doing this, they can keep him moving, keep him healthy, and then see what he can really do. And I think if it's successful and Belichick's able to transition to this type of offense, some other college quarterbacks that run that same style, because there are a lot of them, NFL usually passes them right over. But now I think you're going to start to see them coming back as potential options. So, like, what's going to happen? Guys in the past that ran like that, I mean, going back to even Crouch at Nebraska, like, not even a chance in the NFL. But now if you're going to have lesser outlets and maybe like, hey, let's bring in some more run-first type stuff, maybe you'll see some of those guys come back as options for the NFL. And I think that type of stuff makes it more exciting compared to just guys running around and throwing out bombs. And then sometimes they don't have receivers, so their team is bad. Like, look at all the times where Aaron Rodgers couldn't move the ball, and at the end of the game, he just ends up throwing the ball up, and it's almost like, are they going to make a comeback? Sometimes it's successful for some reason. Other times it's not. But let's see what else. I don't know. There's a lot of defensive signing. The Browns made some moves. Same with the Jets. But the Jets going in and focusing on defense, I don't think that's a big surprise, considering they hired Saleh. So we'll see how this all shakes out, and we'll be able to go through a little bit next week. The one thing, like the Broncos, they're looking for a quarterback. They keep Von Miller with the drop salary cap. That's kind of surprising. But with like the Raiders, everyone seems to be downplaying them with Derek Carr. I mean, they're getting rid of, I mean, they lost their top wide receiver and an offensive lineman. Actually, multiple linemen, I think. They don't have a good list on here. So we'll see what happens with them, and is Derek Carr even going to be gone? Like, bringing in Russell Wilson and then also getting rid of their wide receivers, like, okay, what are we doing? I don't know. Is there anything else you wanted to hit on with NFL and free agency and stuff?
No, I mean, I think with some of the free agency stuff, you almost have to take with a grain of salt this year because coming out of the pandemic, I think a lot of teams are kind of braced for a drop in the salary cap. So I would be surprised to see a lot of really crazy movement because a lot of teams are going to be kind of strapped. You'll see some higher things going, but I think what you're going to end up seeing this year in particular is you're going to see more focus on letting some of these guys go and seeing where the draft picks fall. And then after free agency, having some of these other, like after this first crazy round of signings, I think you'll see more being addressed after the draft.
Yeah, that's very true. The draft is going to be key, and that's where, like, I'm not even worried about the Steelers right now because they could build for the future by letting some of the free agents go, keeping some of that space, maybe making a few trades here and there to open up not even opening up salary cap space, but just getting more picks, knowing that most likely teams are already anticipating having fans in the stands for at least part of the season, at least the start of it, which they didn't have last year. So they're hoping that that can boost up. There wasn't a gigantic drop for the NFL in ratings compared to a couple of the other sports that we brought in. I mean, even the Super Bowl was crazy. I mean, compared to even non-sports stuff, like the Grammys had the lowest like of all time, and they dropped like 50%. Could you imagine if the Super Bowl went from 100 million to like 50 million? Like, that is crazy. But they weathered the storm, so now you're able to focus on next year and say, let's see what we have. And that's why I know they draft well. So get more draft picks. Tell Roethlisberger, like, hey, if you can hang on for a few more years, like, try to just stay healthy, do your thing. Maybe you could see it for 2 more years. And then if they're able to get more weapons and keep focused on the defense, keep him around. I have no problem with that. But, like, just bringing him in this year, you know they're not going to have the salary on the books. We'll see how it all shakes out. I'm not completely negative on him yet. But bringing back Ben, I knew that was going to eat into it. So we'll see. I'll reserve my judgment right now. You have anything else for the NFL?
Nope.
Let's see. So I don't even know if I have other stuff. If I missed some other stuff, we'll get back to it next week. I know I mentioned the Steelers re-signed Zach Banner. I think I did off the top. Right now, we're going to transition because only like once a year, the NCAA basketball tournament, where I'm going to get into some of the basketball stuff. And I wanted to talk about this because we usually have a whole show dedicated to some of it. I'll probably go through the bracket, do some best bets. But this is the same thing we talked about with the NFL. The season was so messed up this year that I think if you're going to gamble, this year could be the year where you can make some pretty safe picks, because there are going to be some teams that are dropped out. Like, I just don't see it at this point. With the way they scheduled it, it doesn't make sense, Matt. Already 6 officials went to their hotel, and instead, the hotel rooms weren't ready. They all went out to eat. They're all out because of the coronavirus. They all had to go home. So now they're having to bring in other officials. If it happened to one team, like one set of officials, it's going to happen to a team. Like, it's already happened. You saw Virginia drop out of the ACC tournament. You saw Duke drop out. You saw, was it Kansas maybe? From the Big 12. I think that's who dropped out. There were a couple other teams. I just don't remember off the top of my head. But you're looking at a big tournament. It's going to be a crazy one. And I hope that a team just doesn't get eliminated because they get the virus. Because it's no fault to them. I'm saying that right off the top. No fault to the team. This is purely on the shoulders of administration. They know that they could have built in bye weeks. They also could have bubbled, like try to do a bubble. They're not doing that. They're still bringing all of the teams into the same venue, Matt, or the same area, same hotels. That if it does start to spread, guess what? Most of the teams are going to get it. Like, why not separate it to different places? Or, like, just play it where the cases are low. Like, they could have did that because hockey looked at it, and then they ultimately waited. I would wish they would have done that in June, and then you could have seen something to happen. Maybe the NHL has, like, great ratings because people were really hungry for sports at that time. And then when football comes back, you're not winning that NHL. So here we go. They have all teams in. Duke's out, which is great because of how Coach K played the whole thing. Oh, we don't know if it's safe to play. He waited until his team had a bunch of losses to even bring that up. Then they had to drop out of the ACC tournament. And then they left it open still, Matt. They were like, hey, just because we dropped out doesn't mean we wouldn't play in the NCAA. Done.
Well, yeah, why wouldn't you pass on the money?
Yeah, get out of here. That's exactly what I say to them. Because they were having issues. And so now, I talk about some teams, it's like, oh, some teams look like they might have issues. Maybe it's the way their training and stuff set up. They're on neutral sites now. So it's not on the team. Like, it could be random. It could be a guy bringing in food, spreading it to the team. It could be anything. But we're going to go through the picks here. I wasn't too surprised. I think the NCAA, they were going to try to get some of their bigger names in. People were surprised that, like, Syracuse got in and Michigan State got in. There's no way, if teams like Duke are out, that they're not going to try to bring all of these other teams in. So, anyone that you have, I didn't even switch the topic on the video screen, so I'm sorry. Anyone that you have before we get started, who do you think is going to win it all?
Florida State.
That's impossible, Matt. They're in Michigan's bracket.
Back-to-back national champions.
I can't believe you're still claiming that weak ACC tournament champ. Were they even the regular season ACC champs last year?
Yes, and tournament champs and national champs. They were all of them. So they're going to be back-to-back. They're going to repeat.
I don't know. I didn't do any research. I didn't look at that Florida State history. But I will say that it was a shame that they didn't play last year and even tried to do it with just the top teams from like each tournament, like each thing. I know they canceled it because they said like, hey, we don't know. Let's play it for safe. They could have delayed it. And they could have just picked maybe the top, 24 teams. But instead, they lost so much money on it. It's almost like you don't know. And I've said it before. The NCAA should step in and just award all of those teams with national championships. I don't know how you would do it with like the Big Ten or whatever because they had so many people tie. But
well, I'll do you one better. Why don't, if you know that open air is going to help with stopping the spread, why not just play some of these games in open air, open venue situations?
Oh, I've said that before, Matt.
Ventilation and things like that.
I've said that, and the reason they're not going to do it is because of the way the game is played, with all the flopping and stuff. Because like even with the NBA, could you imagine if the NBA played out how the game would instantly change? Like LeBron James isn't going to be on the floor every trip down the floor. He's just not. Because guess what? His knee would be scraped to hell. He'd be bleeding all over the place with all the flops he does. And so there's even a thing. I forget what I was watching. I think it was Michigan, actually, in the Big Ten tournament. And they called like a flop warning. It's like, if you knew the guy flopped, why are you just giving him a warning? Because then his team ended up shooting free throws. It's like, just have him. He flopped. Get rid of the free throws. Have it wipe out whatever other foul you saw. Because that's what I don't understand. Like, you're like, oh, hey, we saw that. We're watching you. It's like, no, penalize him. If the flop is so ridiculous that you have to call it out and announce it on the speaker, that I was like, oh, okay. But like even just looking at the NCAA stuff last year, because I'm off on a tangent here, I'm going to try to get back on track. There were teams like Dayton that they ended up ranked higher than Florida State met in the final AP poll, but that was a once in a lifetime thing. They had a great team. Now this year, I don't even think they're in the tournament. So they lost out at a chance to make a championship run. Like Gonzaga and Kansas, the teams that were ranked number 1 and 2, which I said backwards, but they're back this year. So like it didn't mean much to them. Florida State's back in the tournament, but like a team like Dayton, not even claiming national champs, or even San Diego State that was ranked 6th, like I think the NCAA should have some type of thing where they're able to like just have it unofficial champs like they do for football. Because you know if the NCAA ever stepped in and had like the National Football Playoff, all those unofficial champs are going to be wiped out. all these Alabama playoff wins, those championships aren't going to count now. It'll be just like the Super Bowl. Everything that happened before the Super Bowl, no one talks about. So, like, if Alabama loses Nick Saban and then the NCAA steps in and makes a basketball or football playoff, guess what? All those Alabama fans are going to be so mad that they only have unofficial championships. So, I'm just putting that out there because that's a thing. But I don't understand why the NCAA can't say, like, hey, just claim a bunch of unofficial ones for this year and put the banners up. Just put them up. But going into the tournament now, Gonzaga's the overall number one. They're playing in a region where they're going to play the play-in team, and then they're either going to play Oklahoma or Missouri, followed by Creighton, UC Santa Barbara, Virginia, and Ohio. Who out of that group, because I'm just going to do it in groups of like whatever it would be till the Elite Eight, I guess. Who do you think stands out? Do you think anyone can upset Gonzaga in that group?
I mean, being that this year is as bizarre as what it is, I'm going to say no. Like, I think that they've managed to stay healthy. They've managed to do the things that they need to do. I think they're going to ride it out.
And I'm looking at the same thing. I think in that section, Gonzaga, they're gonna go ahead and advance through the first weekend because I'm thinking that they're on a run. Their only problem is they haven't been battle tested. 2 games doesn't really battle test you. Like, I think where they're going to get upset would be the next weekend, which we'll hit on next week. So I'm thinking Gonzaga's going to run that group. Virginia has the talent to do it, but they're facing coronavirus issues, team not staying healthy. Like, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not super high on the Big 12 this year. And to be honest, before we even go any further, a lot of people are really high on the Big 10. I'm not really sold on them either. And I'll say this off like before I get into it because some of my picks might not make sense. I don't know if the Big 10 is going to have a great tournament. Because the thing that stands out to me every single year is the officiating in the conference. It's different than what they officiate in the ACC and all these other ones. And when you get into the NCAA, they don't call it as free-flowing as what the Big Ten, like, they're more bruising, and so they let a lot of hooking and holding go. And I think whenever you see that happen in the NCAA tournament, they don't call it. Like, they sit back and they don't call it the same way. And so the Big Ten teams, they really don't know what to do. And even though some teams are able to make big runs because they've been close before. But, like, I don't see a team like Illinois that's going to come down the stretch. The one team that I'll get into when we get there that I think can make a run is going to be based on the shooting that they have and guys that can step up. But the next block, we have USC, and let's see, because this one doesn't even have the playing games. So, because I think one of these is going to have some type of big-time matchup whenever I look at it. So I want to make sure that I have that in here before I go through it. Let's see. All right, here we go. So, yeah, Gonzaga is going to play App State, which people were surprised that they were, or North, whatever that one is. But people were hoping that they would line that up for Michigan so that they could have a potential App State rematch in basketball, which I think would have been awful to even have, and even people want that. But USC is either going to play Wichita or is it Drake? I hate ESPN having these abbreviations. Then you also have Kansas, Eastern Washington, Oregon, VCU, or Iowa, Grand Canyon. Out of that group, I'm going to say it's going to come down to Kansas and Iowa. And this is where I don't think Iowa's going to win. They have Garza, but he didn't play well against Michigan. And Kansas is going to have those athletes. They're going to come in rested. I know they had their coronavirus issues or whatever, but they're highly talented. And I think some of the Big 12 teams, like, I'm not sold on the conference, but I think those teams at the top are going to go far. What are your thoughts on that group, Matt?
I almost think this is one of those years where, as a whole, I think if you're a gambling person, you're almost better off betting on the higher seeds, because I think you really haven't seen as much. Like a lot of these teams that come in that have been battle tested, you really haven't seen a lot of their games. I think, I mean, maybe I'll be mistaken, but I think this is going to be a heavy-handed year for the tournament, where I think because of COVID, I think you're going to see more of a discrepancy. Like, I think you're going to see more of your higher seeds. So I think whoever those higher seeds are, I think are going to run the earlier stages of this bracket, and you're not going to see as many upsets.
And that's where, I mean, as I'm going through, I'm trying to pick just the top ones so that we can get through this on the show. And it's too tough with just audio on the podcast going through each matchup without doing like hour on hour of show, which you can get elsewhere. But right now, like looking at them, you know the top teams are going to go through, I think, a lot of parts. The next group, though, is the one with Michigan. Isaiah Livers is out, and that's a big-time player. I know Michigan, they have a little bit of depth issues this year because Beeline left, and Juwan Howard's big-time recruiting class doesn't come in until next year. Last year, they lost their big recruit because of the coronavirus. I think he signed somewhere else or potentially went to Europe because they had that issue with like 2 years in a row where their big guys that they signed in the top 100 or whatever just didn't end up going on campus. So now you have a Michigan team with one of their guys in a stress fracture in his foot. He could play, but right now it's looking unlikely. So could I see LSU or St. Bonaventure upsetting them? Like, I don't think they lose to the 16 seed. It's a big chance, but they also have Hunter Dickinson, and he's like a big-time 7-foot center that's so old school, and Juwan Howard definitely taught him a ton as a freshman, where I think it's too much. So I think you look at the next group of teams where Colorado, Georgetown, or Florida State, UNC Greensboro. The one team, if you're looking for that 12-5 upset, Georgetown. Georgetown's playing hot in the Big East tournament. They won. They're coming in. The Pac-12 is just like in Pac-12 football. You're kind of like, all right, what do they have going for them? I think Georgetown wins big. And I wouldn't even be surprised, Matt, if they beat Florida State. What do you think?
You say that, and I know I had joked that Florida State was winning the national championship, but when you look at the way that they've played this year, they have the talent to win it all, but they also play so inconsistent down the stretch that very easily they could lose to a team like Georgetown. I absolutely wouldn't put it past them to lose to a team like that, because for whatever reason they have these taller players, and rather than working inside, it's like they just settle for these longer jump shots and deeper threes, and when they hit them, they'll blow teams out by 40 points, but they'll also lose by 22. And it's like it's so hard to get a consistent beat on where this team's playing, because they should have absolutely throttled the ACC championship game when Virginia had to drop out. They should have just absolutely went to town, and they ended up losing in the ACC championship because of poor shot selection. And hopefully it's something that they clean up. And it's like guys get into foul trouble so quickly that they get pulled, and then they're not available later in the game when they really are needed.
And that's the same problem that Michigan has with Livers out. Like, when your big-time guy isn't there to take over the game, like you saw, if you watch a Big Ten tournament, they lost on the final shot against Ohio State because they ended up jacking up a three. It's like, get the ball inside. There was a miscommunication with the play that was called or whatever. And so I know they tried to run the clock out and stuff, but, like, without him playing, that's your guy. So, like, I could see Michigan losing. I wouldn't be surprised. I think a lot of people are picking Michigan to go just because of the size and some of the talent that they have. But all of those teams are inconsistent. Georgetown's where they are because they got hot, also inconsistent. But if I was making my pick, right now I would probably lean between those three teams: Michigan, Georgetown, or Florida State. But I think it's a gamble either way. Like, the safe money says Michigan, number one seed. They've played long. They also have a big-time injury. So do you want to bet on that? Or you could just go, if you want to go with the potential winnings, go with Georgetown. They could lose in the first round, but they came in hot from the Big East, and as you've seen in the past with some UConn, who's also my next group that I have potentially going far, they can get hot. They have big-time shooters. So let's look at that group. BYU, Michigan State, or UCLA. Then you have Texas, Abilene and Christian, UConn, Maryland, Alabama, or Iona. And I'll say, I think this is another group that's going to be a mess. I think of any of the brackets, this East side is a mess because I could see UConn making a run. I'm not sold on Alabama. How many times, other than Kentucky, have you seen SEC teams actually go far in the tournament and then compete in the Final Four level? Like some teams get hot and they try to make that jump, but they're just not able to get it done, and then they get exposed by a more talented team. UConn could come in there. Like I've seen Maryland play. Michigan's beat them every time by double digits. I think UConn easily wins that game. They give Alabama a game and potentially win it. I'm not sold on Texas. So, and with the other bracket, you're kind of looking at BYU. BYU actually has the NCAA. If BYU wins both games and they're the pick for this region or this grouping, they're going to actually flip the game times next weekend so that BYU doesn't have to play on Sunday. So even the NCAA is looking at this and they're like, yeah, that group, BYU could end up winning this because that group's not strong. I could also see Michigan State. They're so inconsistent. Who's to say that they don't get hot and go on a run? They did at the end of the Big Ten regular season where they won 3 games over top 10 teams. They have the talent. And so I could easily see Michigan State somehow beating Alabama to get to the Elite Eight. And I would just shake my head. Or wait, I guess it would be the Sweet 16. My bad. So looking at that, my pick is UConn. Because I just think that the Big East, I know I had Georgetown. If I was making my pick, I would probably have Michigan and UConn in the Sweet 16 in this region right now. I think because I don't want to count out Florida State or Georgetown, but I can't have 2 Big East team upsets. So I'm going to go UConn. What do you think?
I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that it's such a cluster that you probably could go with UConn. And I think that's probably the safest pick.
Oh, yeah, I guess I am looking at it too far. But either way, I guess that would be the Elite Eight team that goes all the way through. And I would have them playing probably Michigan State because I'm not sold on Texas. And in the other side, I guess I would have Georgetown playing Michigan, going back up through. I've said Kansas versus Iowa, and then Gonzaga versus, I want to say Virginia. I want to lean Creighton, but they got killed in their tournament, and so I'm picking the other guys. Going on the other side now. Baylor, Hartford, North Carolina, and Wisconsin, which I think this is a very intriguing grouping. So let's look at that one. Who do you think pushes through?
I'm going to be biased and just think that just off of star ratings alone, it should be UNC.
And that's why I think that's who I'm leaning with, just because you would think, oh, the ACC's out of this. Richie's not even picking any ACC teams. He has Virginia losing to Gonzaga. Like, that's a slap in the face. And I think that they're playing well enough that they can win. And I don't know how to feel about, like, the Big 12. I know Baylor has been so good, but they also have the same problem Michigan had where they weren't allowed to play for 3 weeks. And when they came back, they haven't looked good. And so in the tournament, they're going to be looking for shots. And if they're not falling, like, you're either going to be playing a North Carolina team that's more talented than you in terms of, like, athletes, or a Wisconsin team that's just going to make life hell, where you're not going to get any shots because they're slowing the ball down, where you're only getting, like, however many possessions a game to score 40 points instead of, like, your normal 80. So I think Baylor's not getting out. I would say North Carolina right now, but I wouldn't be surprised to see Wisconsin either. So I'll stick with North Carolina. Next group, Villanova, Winthrop, Purdue, and North Texas. For me, Villanova. Purdue always chokes, and until they don't choke, it's not like their top teams coming in where you think, oh, this is a Purdue team that's going to make a run. No, son. Villanova, I feel like I'm big East heavy right now, but what do you think in that group?
I like Nova there too. I mean, you're being a little bit slanted towards the Big East, but I think it's fair. They've been consistently playing well over the entirety of their conference, so I think it's a fair assessment to make.
And I'm actually just going to make my picks while I'm on the show, just because if people think that I'm crazy. These are my picks. I think Purdue will play them, but I don't think that they're going to win. I think Villanova goes and plays UNC. The next group, Texas Tech versus Utah State, Arkansas versus Colgate. I have Texas Tech coming through, and I know that kind of goes against what I said about the Big 12, but Texas Tech is defense first. They're coached very similar to what John Beilein had at Michigan, where they come in, don't really do well in the regular season. I mean, I know Michigan had a couple of regular season champs with him, and they had tournament champs, but like realistically, is Arkansas going to beat them? I'm not sold on any SEC team other than Kentucky, and guess what? Kentucky's not here. So just how bad is the SEC? Because normally Kentucky just runs through them. So I'm not even sure, but that's my pick. What do you got?
Oh, I don't know. I was kind of leaning towards the same thing, but it's just because of long coach Bobby Knight being there. There's no logical reason for it.
All right, next one. Your boys down in Florida, Virginia Tech, Ohio State, or Oral Roberts?
Well, that's a good place to pick Oral Roberts, just because I hate everyone else.
I'll say that I hate him, but I think Ohio State's going to win it because Washington is such an assassin. Like he's beat Michigan just because he doesn't miss down the stretch. He's taken Illinois to overtime, and everyone's picking Illinois to win like the national champ. It's like, yo, Ohio State's right there. They can outshoot anyone. And I think in terms of like the Big Ten making it to the Final Four, for whatever reason, I have a feeling it's going to be Ohio State this year. And so I would have them even going. I think that they'll play North Carolina, and everyone will be like, oh, North Carolina's going to go ahead and take it. But I think you see Ohio State make the Final Four, and they're the only team from the Big Ten potentially that I have going that far as I go through my picks, because I think you're going to see some weird teams. They could end up losing to Oral Roberts. And then everyone's going to be like, oh, but I think you have a guy, some guards that can just pick up and shoot the ball. They play well enough in the post that they go. I think Texas Tech gives them some trouble, but like they've beaten top teams all year, and I hate it. But that's going to be my pick. Let's see what else. Oh, I got one more bracket to go through as I try to figure out my other one. Let's go. So Illinois, Drexel, Loyola Chicago, or Georgia Tech? What do you have?
I'm going to go with Illinois just because that just seems like a logical pick to make. For as much as everyone's hyping them up, maybe this is a year that the Big Ten has a bigger push other than the typical Michigan.
Yeah, because, I mean, you've had Wisconsin come close, but the year they came close, they had big-time studs on that team. They had Frank Kaminsky. And so, like, right now, Illinois has a big-time center like that. And so, like, as I say this and I put out the brackets, it's set up for a very deep Ohio State run because, like, they're either going to play Virginia or Florida and then Texas Tech or Arkansas. Like, they're not playing any teams that are more talented than them until they would play either Villanova or North Carolina. Potentially Baylor, but I don't even know in terms of, like, recruiting rankings if that works out. Same with Michigan. I know they have the injuries, but they have more talent than everyone in that bracket, and the next team up will be Florida State. And then you're looking at the bottom bracket, but it's like they have more talent than Texas and Alabama in them, So, like, realistically, they're coming in as a number one. You could say the injury is going to hurt them, but I could see Michigan making it too. So I can't really pick Michigan, Ohio State, and Gonzaga, and Illinois in the Final Four. That would just be ridiculous. So I'm going to go with Sister Jean, Matt. She's going to be at the tournament. I'm going to say Loyola Chicago upsets Illinois and makes it. It could come back to bite me, but whatever. I'm rolling with it. I've seen
she better
them.
get her COVID shot.
She did. She's vaccinated, Matt. She's going to be there. They went to the Final Four where Michigan beat them, and everyone was like, oh, yeah, that Michigan team wasn't fair, whatever, blah, blah. They shouldn't have been playing Loyola. Chicago, Michigan lucked into the national championship, but they've been there. I think that they're going to make a run, and everyone else is picking Illinois, so don't count them out. Going a little bit long, but we got next group, Tennessee, Oregon State, Oklahoma State, and Liberty.
I got to go with my got to go with my school. Got to go with Liberty.
I was going to say that was going to be your team. And so this is where I think Oregon State somehow won their conference. I don't think they're that good. So I'm going to go with Tennessee. But I'm also going to go with Oklahoma State over Liberty. And Oklahoma State's going to be my pick from this region, I think, as I'm going through this. Because they've been playing pretty sweet. And unfortunately, if it shakes out that way and Ohio State plays Oklahoma State, like, could Ohio State just luck into a national championship appearance? Like, that would be crazy to me. And I'm not saying, like, lock in. They could play someone. They could play Loyola Chicago. Like, Michigan, when they made their run a few years ago to the championship, like, they ended up getting a couple breaks, and I think you need that. And looking at the way they lined up the bracket for some of the Big Ten teams, it's almost like, okay. Because realistically, Illinois could make that run, and you could have Illinois and Ohio State on the same side. It almost happened a few years ago. Was it the Michigan-Purdue year where they were almost playing each other to eliminate? Or maybe it was Wisconsin and Purdue. I think it was someone in Purdue that ended up eliminating Purdue from the same Big Ten conference. That it was almost like that might have been a Final Four or national championship matchup, but just because of the way they drew up the bracket, this year they're not letting that happen.
Yeah.
So the next group, San Diego State and Syracuse, West Virginia and Morehead State. I always pick them. They always let me down. I'm going to go with West Virginia, though. I just like how everyone hates them and their style of play, where everyone's like, all West Virginia does is grab and hook. But I think it's funny. So I'm going to go with them over Syracuse because Syracuse, talented, just like you, my UNC pick. They're very talented. They're going to get into the tournament. They play that weird defensive style. I think West Virginia can beat it because they have the athletes. But I think Syracuse is going to beat San Diego State, even though they're the lower seed. I think that's going to be an upset. What do you think?
I like that. I like that as well. There's something about West Virginia that I like.
And like Syracuse, they're usually, even like when Michigan would beat them with Beeline, it was almost like it took one of his awesome coaching games to beat Syracuse. And so like when other teams, they're not prepared for it, like they're going to get a win. Like Syracuse losing in the first round, I don't even know what their success rate is, but just because of them not seeing the play, like West Virginia sees a lot of that in their conference, so I think that they'll be able to get it done. But I think that's why I have Syracuse moving on. And then the last one, Clemson and Rutgers, Houston and Cleveland State. What do you think?
I'm going to go with Clemson just because I think maybe they're going to start feeding off of some of that football energy and just building enough to get a basketball presence.
That's my thing. I don't think it's going to be Clemson, though. I'm actually going to go with, and I probably will go with Houston all the way because I saw Houston play Michigan tough a few years ago, and I thought that it took a buzzer-beating shot to beat them. And now that they even have more talent, it's almost like they're close for a run. I would like to see Rutgers make that run just because some of the Big Ten stuff and everyone says how they don't deserve to be in. Clemson, though, like some of their basketball stuff, I think it's going to take a few more years for them to see the football pull over. But you're seeing with Alabama getting a number 2 seed. I mean, Michigan's already made that transition back to really focused on basketball in terms of success over football. But some of the other football schools, Matt, that we're seeing, Ohio State, Oklahoma State, I have Florida State potentially making a run, even though I'm probably not going to end up picking them. But like, you're seeing football schools show up in this basketball tournament, and I think that's where you're looking at it. But overall, just to recap here, my pick I have Gonzaga and Kansas. I think Gonzaga is going to go to the national championship game. So I have them in. I have my other one. I picked Michigan over Georgetown. And so then I have Michigan and UConn. And I have Michigan going to the Final Four. I don't know if that's bias on my part, but I just really can't. If Florida State was more consistent, I would pick them. But like you said, they should have won the ACC tournament. So I'm not really confident on them getting past Georgetown. I just don't think Georgetown or UConn have enough to make a run to the national championship or the Final Four. But I think that they'll be there. And who knows, maybe if they get Livers back by then, they could be a national champion favorite, or that Gonzaga-Michigan might be the game of the tournament if it ends up happening. Then my other side, I have Oklahoma State over Houston. And then who else do I have? I have Ohio State over North Carolina. And North Carolina getting into Elite Eight like that, that's a very successful season for them. So I have I don't even know who I should pick to play Gonzaga. Would it be Ohio State or Oklahoma State? Because they're both probably not going to be picked a lot. Could Gonzaga beat 2 Big Ten teams back-to-back, Michigan and Ohio State? Potentially. Well, I'm going to put that in for now. That's probably what I'm going to submit on ESPN. I'll put this bracket up, open up the group for Southbound Sports if anyone else wants to join. It might be too late until you hear this. But I wasn't really sure what was going to happen with the NCAA tournament, so I don't even know if I opened it up, but I'll make sure it's open as I submit this. But those are going to be my picks for the show. I have Ohio State losing to Gonzaga. I'll pick a score right now, 78 to 73. I think they pull away a little bit at the end, but Ohio State's shooting keeps them in it. And honestly, it could very easily be Michigan-Ohio State national championship game, which would be crazy. And for everyone talking about how Duke-UNC is a great rivalry, no one cares about that rivalry every week of the year except for that one weekend. Michigan-Ohio State, could you imagine if Duke and UNC played in the college football playoffs? That's what a Final Four with Michigan and Ohio State is like.
Wow.
That's a real rivalry for you. And I hate those guys, and I'm picking them. So that's my final thought. Those are my best bets because I had this on the thing. I think Oklahoma State's looking really hot. If you want some upset money, I'm thinking Georgetown and UConn both have high potential. Let's see, North Carolina, I think that they have a chance to upset Baylor. And Ohio State, they're not really an upset because they're number 2. But I could see them going all the way, or Oklahoma State winning that side to the national championship game. I just don't think Gonzaga's going to win. You could think Iowa's going to go all the way if you're betting just on national champions, but I don't think they got good odds. I think Oklahoma State would get you the best odds out of the teams that I have in here. I just don't know if a 4 seed's ever won it recently. But that's my thing. You got anything else, Matt?
Nope.
All right, so that's it for the show. Wanted to just go through the tournament, give it a little bit of breakup since we have some NFL stuff that we're waiting on. I did want to thank everyone for downloading the show. Make sure you tell your friends. Getting good download numbers. Still doing the video on Facebook Live on Tuesdays at 9. So you can subscribe on there. I think if you like the Facebook page, it'll give you the update. I want to say that Facebook's been shoving our podcast under the gaming section for some reason. So some people haven't been able to find it. I don't know. If we have to move it to somewhere else, I'll let you guys know. But if they're not going to show the video as much anymore because they think it's a gaming thing, I don't even know how to get around it. It wouldn't let me change it today. But I'll try to do some research for next week. So yeah, let me know if you see anything weird like that. We also put it on YouTube the next day, but with some of the free agent stuff or like tournament, I understand that that's kind of late. But I just submitted my bracket. So whatever I said on this show is my official bracket. I'll open that up, put it up on our website. I'll link to the podcast, this episode. So go to southboundsports.com and you'll see the episode at the top. I'll put a link there for you to fill out your bracket. And anything else, Matt?
Nope. Thanks for the support.
All right. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.